Ahoy gamers, Flor, Geneva here, and welcome to a new series where I will be reviewing every single game in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. And you may be asking yourself, Flor, why? Why would you do that? Well, you see, sometime in 2014 I stumbled upon a series of videos by Russian YouTuber Anton Filinov where he looked at every Sonic game that was known to have come out at the time, and this series had a great effect on me. Not only was it the thing that actually got me interested in Sonic and got me to join the fandom, which would eventually lead to me joining Western communities, learning English, and meeting most of my longtime internet friends, high roll, but it was also the first time I've seen this type of content on the internet, and having finished watching the retrospective, I quickly began looking for other retro gaming review channels. These channels, in their turn, would greatly influence my taste in video games, as well as make me realize the potential content making had, which is the reason I eventually decided to start this channel. So, as pathetic as that might sound, yes, this decade-old series of Sonic reviews from some 20-year-old Russian version is perhaps one of the most influential pieces of media I've ever consumed and played the biggest role in making me the person I am today. And since Sonic is turning 30 this year, I thought I'd give it my own shot at making a retrospective series, both as a tribute to one of my favorite video game characters of all time and one of my favorite YouTube series of all time. For this retrospective, I've looked into every single game that has ever come out in this franchise, in addition to reading and watching countless reviews, video essays, forum threads, and interviews with developers in order to have a full grasp on what each game is. So the conclusions that I reach in this series are, in my opinion at least, a very accurate assessment of the game's quality based on what I, critics, and fans think. None of it is definitive, of course, and there are some games that you really can't say much about, so it's not like what I'm saying here is the objective truth, but as far as Sonic analysis goes, I think that's probably as objective as I can get. I also hope that my retrospective could function as an entry point to the series for someone who doesn't know a lot about Sonic, but is curious, much like Filinov's did for me. I know it sounds a bit pretentious, but I'd be more than honored to be someone's guide into this peculiar world. Anyway, without further ado, I'm Flor Geneva, and welcome to the complete Sonic the Hedgehog 30th anniversary retrospective. Let's go! By the late 1980s, almost the entirety of the video game industry was controlled by Nintendo and their 8-bit NES console, with the other manufacturers desperately trying to compete. Among these companies was Sega, who in 1988 released a console called the Mega Drive. Despite having higher capabilities than the NES, Mega Drive lacked a title that could demonstrate its full potential, and Sega, seeing Mario as one of the major reasons behind Nintendo's success, felt that having a strong character representing them would be crucial in their fight for dominance. And since their current mascot Alex Kidd wasn't doing shit, Sega organized an internal competition to let its employees come up with a design for a new one. Artist Naoto Oshima came up with a concept of a speedy character running around loops and approached programmer Yuji Naka to help him test out the idea. Together they decided to make a game where levels would be built in such a way that the more you mastered them, the faster you'd be able to complete them, and brought on level designer Hirokazu Yasuhara to help them turn that concept into reality. They settled on the character curling into a ball to attack enemies, since that would also allow him to pick up speed, which would play nicely into the whole going fast around loops thing. So Oshima looked at animals that could curl into a ball and landed on the hedgehog. He designed a character reminiscent of the likes of Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat, made him blue to represent Sega's logo, and gave him a personality based on the one of Bill Clinton, who at the time was actually known for having a cocky personality and a get-it-done-now attitude, as opposed to, you know, infidelity. Although originally given the placeholder name Mr. Hedgehog, or Mr. Needlemouse as it is sometimes translated, it wouldn't take too long for the team to come up with a proper name. They chose to call him Sonic. You get it? Because he's fast! Sonic ended up becoming one of the finalists in the mascot contest, and the team knew that if they really wanted to make an impression, they had to go all out. And so they managed to get a permission to start working on the game right away, independently of the contest. Oshima wanted the game to have a pro-environmental message, and the game's villain needed to reflect that. And who would be a better fit for an antagonist in a man versus nature story than a, well, man? So Oshima took one of his scrapped mascot designs, that of a bald, fat, mustached man, and repurposed him to be the game's villain, Dr. Eggman. One day, Mark Cerny, head of Sega's American development studio, Sega Technical Institute, STI for short, visited Sega of Japan and met Osima, who showed him concept arts of Sonic. He was ultimately unimpressed, but thought that he wasn't qualified to judge, so he took the concept arts with him to show it to the higher-ups at Sega of America. At first, they didn't like the idea because they found it too strange, and what the fuck even is a hedgehog anyway, am I right? But eventually they came around and decided that they will accept Sonic, but only if changes were made. In some of the concept art, Sonic had fangs, fur, his own rock band, and even a human girlfriend named Madonna who was apparently meant to feel like, and this is an actual quote, a male fantasy. The fuck were they thinking? So the Sega of America marketing team was tasked with getting rid of all of this, and they're often cited as the people who saved Sonic and made him good, but according to interviews given by Yuji Naka, a lot of these ideas never made it past early stages of development, and most of the depictions of Sonic in early concept art look kind of normal, so the extent Americans had on Sonic's final design is honestly debatable. Either way, the only differences between Japanese and American promotional material was that Americans redesigned Sonic to look more smug and rebellious, and Eggman to look more menacing, in addition to renaming him to Dr. Ivor Robotnik. Americans also came up with their own backstory for Sonic and wrote what is known as the Sonic Bible, according to which Sonic was a normal brown hedgehog living in Nebraska until one day he met a kind scientist named Dr. Kintabor, yes that's Robotnik backwards, and after a failed experiment, Sonic turned blue and Kintabor fused with a rotten egg and became evil. What the fuck is this shit? In some of the later drafts, Sonic's homeworld was changed from Earth to planet Mobius, and some claim that it is a mistranslation of Yuji Naka saying that Sonic lives on a Mobius strip in one of the interviews. However, that interview dates to a year after the draft, so something just doesn't add up. So we don't know for sure where Sega of America got the name Mobius from, however it would stick around in various forms of media, and to this day people still debate on whether Sonic lives on Earth or Mobius. Finally, the game was completed and the team officially adopted the now recognizable and unfortunately quite controversial name Sonic Team, and on June 23rd, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog was released to the world. One thing to note though is that it wasn't actually Sonic's first or even second appearance in video games. Before that, he appeared in the racing game Red Mobile, where he made a cameo as an air freshener, and then he appeared again as an enemy in the game The Adventures of Quick and Silva, although that one wasn't really done with Sega's permission, but I still think it counts. Alright, so I think it's about time we actually get to the fucking game, so let's look at the very first entry in the Sonic series and see how it holds up. Dr. Eggman arrives on South Island in search of the 6 fabled gemstones called the Chaos Emeralds, wanting to harness their power for world domination. He builds a base on the island and begins kidnapping its inhabitants and placing them in robotic shells using these so-called badniks to scour the island in search of the emeralds. It's up for Sonic to stop Eggman, free his friends, and gather the emeralds before the Doctor does. The game is broken up into 6 zones, each consisting of 3 levels called Acts. Acts 1 and 2 end with you running past a signpost, and Act 3 ends with a boss encounter against Eggman, after which you break open a capsule and free the animals, signaling the end of the zone. Scattered across levels are gold rings that act as a health bar of sorts. If Sonic has at least one in his possession, he cannot be killed by an enemy or spike. Instead, being hit while having rings causes them to scatter, and you're given a few seconds to pick them up before they disappear. You can also find item boxes resembling computer monitors, breaking which will give you different rewards like a shield, temporary invincibility, or an extra life. The game's presentation is stunning. Its soundtrack, composed by Masato Nakamura of the Japanese pop band Dreams Come True, was intentionally made to resemble movie scores, and coupled with the bright visuals and the use of pseudo-polygonal sprites and parallax scrolling make the game's worlds come to life. Obviously none of it is as impressive as it was back then, but it still makes an impression even all these years later, I would argue. What separates Sonic the Hedgehog from other platformers of its time is the way movement is handled. Sonic has very complex physics and yet very simplistic controls. You can only move around, jump and roll, however your speed, jump height and trajectory change depending on how you interact with the level's curved terrain. Rolling down slopes allows you to pick up speed, going up ramps with enough momentum can get get you to reach higher places, etc. This sense of flow is the defining quality of the series and the main reason behind its appeal. Collecting 100 rings gives you an extra life, and completing an act with at least 50 rings in your possession opens up a portal above the signpost which takes you to the special stage. There you have to traverse a psychedelic rotating maze, at the end of which is a Chaos Emerald you need to collect. Getting at least 50 rings in a special stage gives you a continue, and if you manage to get all 6 Chaos Emeralds, you get nothing. I mean, you get the good ending, but apart from a slightly different ending cutscene, collecting the emeralds does virtually nothing. It's more of an optional challenge for those who want to test their skills. The levels can be divided into 2 categories: faster-paced speed-focused ones and slower-paced platforming-focused ones. A good example of the former would be Green Hill, the game's first zone. Despite having an emphasis on speed, the level is actually moderately paced and is structured like a normal platformer. It's fairly challenging, meaning you can't just hold right to win, and it's filled with secrets and alternative paths you can find by exploring and taking advantage of Sonic's moveset. The speedrunning aspect doesn't come until you've fully memorized the level layout and mastered Sonic's physics to a point where you can complete the stage without stopping. Playing the level is fun no matter what your pace is, and it's this exact freedom of choice that made the game stand out. Other zones that fit this type are Spring Yard and Starlight, which aren't as well designed as Green Hill, but they follow the same basic concept and feature unique set pieces like pinball bumpers and seesaws to spice up the gameplay. Now, since the game has fast-paced levels with optional platforming, it would make sense to also have slower-paced levels with optional speedrunning to highlight the duality of the game's core concept. You could argue that this is made redundant by the fact that the faster levels are already moderately paced, but at the time those levels seemed so fast that the developers found it necessary to let the player catch their breath. So in theory it's not a bad idea. The problem, however, begins when you realize that the faster levels handle their optional platforming and exploration far better than the slower levels specifically designed around them. These levels are mostly linear, so no exploration, mostly consist of blocky terrain you can interact with in interesting ways, so boring, and they're filled with enemies you will most likely bump into because you couldn't see them coming. So frustrating. Marble Zone has segments where you're literally forced to wait for things to happen in order to progress. Labyrinth is a water level, and unlike real Hedgehog, Sonic can swim, so you're going to be spending the majority of the zone traversing underwater corridors where your speed is drastically reduced and where you're constantly on the hunt for air bubbles so that you don't drown. And Scrap Brain, the game's final zone, literally throws 100 different things at you constantly. I get it's the final zone and it needs to be difficult, but a lot of these hazards are just near impossible to avoid. What's more is that Act 3 of Scrap Brain is literally just Labyrinth again. I mean, there is a shortcut that lets you skip like most of the thing, but playing these levels ranges from frustrating to just boring. While they do occasionally feature tight platforming and some of the slower segments can be skipped with enough momentum, and Scrap Brain actually has a few different paths and secrets, for the most part they just don't interact with Sonic's physics in any fun or interesting way. I get why they were included and I understand some of the design choices behind them, but they're so drastically different from the other half of the game that they just end up breaking the pace. If the levels were more open and had more physics-based obstacles and secrets, then I actually think they could work quite well, but in the way that they're now, well, they're not completely bad, they're just not really Sonic and are different from the rest of the game to a polarizing degree. After Scrap Brain, you get to the final boss and it's decent. You're given no rings when fighting it, which makes it more challenging, but I'm sure you'll beat it in a few tries. It's pretty good difficulty-wise, but it just lacks a certain sense of climax to the game, and the Chaos Emeralds being virtually useless don't exactly help. Sonic the Hedgehog is a game that introduces a unique and for its time revolutionary concept of player interaction. Sonic's complex yet simple to understand physics in combination with the multi-layered level design that allows you to experience the levels in various ways create a one-of-a-kind experience. It stumbles quite hard in the execution of said concepts and seems to be a little confused about how to get its message across, with only half of the game managing to pull it off successfully. However, that half, combined with the game's stellar presentation, proved to be enough, because this game started a franchise that even 30 years later is still popular, and without a strong first impression, that just doesn't happen. It's a great blueprint and starting point for the series, and even though as a standalone game it does fall apart in a few places, overall it is a solid product that aged decently well in my opinion. Not long after the release of Sonic 1, an 8-bit version of the game was made for the Master System and the Game Gear handheld console. It was developed by Ancient, a studio founded by freelance composer Yuzo Koshiro specifically for the purpose of making the game, because Sega did not allow to make contracts with individuals. The team only consisted of about 4 people, including Koshiro's sister, who acted as a graphical designer. This bit of information is truly fascinating and makes the game all the more impressive, and I'm honestly not sure why I've never heard anyone talk about this prior to doing research for the retrospective. As for the game itself, well, it's a more rudimentary version of Sonic with slightly different zones and a different soundtrack composed by Koshiro himself, which by the way really slaps in its own right. Aside from the familiar Green Hill, Labyrinth, and Scrap Brain, we also have the new Bridge, Jungle, and Sky Base zones. There isn't much to say about the first two except that Act 2 of Bridge is a fucking autoscroller, and I honestly don't know what they were thinking either, but Skybase is a nice touch and is a fitting ending for the game. It functions more or less like the 16-bit version, except you find Chaos Emeralds in the levels themselves instead of earning them in the special stages, which also exist here, but just like the Emeralds, they only give you points, which means that yes, they somehow managed to make Chaos Emeralds even more useless than they were in the 16-bit version. Sonic's movement still somehow manages to feel natural despite being a bit stiff, and it isn't a big problem, especially with this game's level design. It's more blocky and they got rid of loops because they were apparently too hard to code, but the levels do have their own share of ramps and gimmicks that play around with Sonic's speed, so it even manages to feel like a Sonic game at times. What doesn't feel as great though is Labyrinth, which in this game is even worse than it was in the original version. Not only is Sonic's movement underwater even slower, now the drowning countdown alone is 25 seconds long. I'm not even kidding. This removes all tension the original level had, which was arguably the best aspect of it. Also, if you're wondering what the difference between the versions is, the Game Gear version is mostly identical to the Master System one, except the field of view is smaller, which makes the boss battles pathetically easy, and Sonic Sprite also doesn't have a nose. For some reason. Overall though, I'd say it's a pretty short but sweet game that feels a bit more structurally sound than the 16-bit version, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's better or worse, because it's just different. It tries to do its own thing instead of copying the original and shoving it into inferior hardware, which I respect, and the fact that it was made by such a small team in only a few months makes it all the more impressive. After Sonic 1 we have... no, not Sonic 2. Sonic Eraser. It came out in 1991 and was only accessible in Japan for those who had the access to the Mega Drive Sega MegaNet modem. And yes, that thing had a fucking online service, not sure how that worked. The service was shut down in 1992 but was brought back in 2004 for personal computers. It was then that Fuggles, owner of the Sonic Cult website, which at the time was one of the largest Sonic fan sites, discovered the service and Sonic Eraser along with it, and with the help of the user Nemesis managed to make a ROM of the game and released it online. So what's the game? Well, to be frank, it's a Tetris clone. It's a Tetris clone. Yes, you heard me right, it is a multiplayer Tetris clone with different game modes where the only thing remotely Sonic is the two Sonics representing the players that sometimes randomly hit each other during gameplay. How captivating. Also, you absolutely have to hear the music of this game, it's just... Alright, next up we have... no, still not Sonic 2. Vaku Vaku Sonic Patrol Car is a children's ride where Sonic takes the role of the policeman patrolling the streets and keeping them safe from Eggman. I'm not joking, I swear. The game takes like 2 minutes to complete and it barely has any substance, but it was actually the first time in history of the franchise that Sonic and Eggman had a voice. Yes, that's right. In this game, Sonic is voiced by Takeshi Kusao, Japanese voice of Trunks, and Eggman was voiced by Masaharu Sato. Also, look at that cabinet. Aww. Alright, what's next? Finally, we got to the fucking sequel. Holy shit, right about time. Tired of corporate politics, Yuji Naka left Sega of Japan before getting rehired into STI by Mark Cerny. Cerny had already brought in a handful of people who worked on Sonic 1, and with Naka's arrival, he pretty much expected Sega to give them the ultimate assignment: make Sonic 2. And it wasn't long before Sega greenlit the project, giving the team 11 months to make the game. The team decided that a new playable character should be introduced, so poetically enough, they organized an internal competition to let the team members come up with the best design. The winner was Yasushi Yamaguchi with a two-tailed fox named Miles Prower. You get it? Because he's fast! Who could use his tails like a propeller in order to fly. The team thought his name should be changed to something simpler, like Tails, but Yamaguchi refused to abandon his incredibly clever wordplay and sneaked it into as many places as he could, from concept art to promo material, and Tails would even end up labeled as Miles in the Japanese version of the game, making both names canon. Finally, on November 21st, 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 released worldwide in an event titled Sonic Tuesday. They really like their wordplays, huh? Eggman is back at it again, searching for the emeralds, this time to power up his new space station called the Death Egg. What? His search leads him to West Side Island, where Sonic had recently arrived to take a break, I guess. There Sonic meets Tails, who begins following him around in fascination. Tails is a young but skilled mechanic, so when Eggman appears and Sonic starts pursuing him throughout the island, he allows Tails to tag along to help out with things like piloting and taking care of his plane, and gradually their bond strengthens as the two become friends. The game has 8 traditional zones, followed by you first flying up to, then storming Eggman's ship, before arriving to the Death Egg for the final boss fight. The number of acts was lowered from 3 to 2, and the presentation has improved greatly as Sonic is faster, the visuals are brighter, and Nakamura is back as the composer, with music being more complex and layered this time around. Interesting thing to mention is that the game's ending theme is actually a cover of one of Dreams Come True's songs, Sweet Dreams. It's not the only track that Nakamura also used for his band, but it's the most well-known example. By default, Sonic will be followed by Tails, who is controlled by very basic AI, but you can also choose to play as either Sonic or Tails individually. There is also a 2-player mode, but it's like a versus thing, and you're only able to play 3 zones with it, so whatever. Sonic also has a new move called the Spin Dash, which has since become a staple of the series. By holding down and pressing jump repeatedly, Sonic will rev up before firing off at great speed, instantly gaining a lot of momentum. This time around, the special stages can be accessed by collecting 50 rings and jumping into a circle that appears above a checkpoint, and the stages themselves consist of you running on a half-pipe, collecting rings, and avoiding bombs. There are now not 6, but 7 emeralds, and this time there is actually an incentive to collect them. Once you do that, you unlock the ability to turn into Super Sonic. If you jump while having at least 50 rings, Sonic will turn yellow and become virtually invincible. However, this power drains rings, so if you reach 0, you turn normal again. Continues are now gained by scoring 10,000 points in a level, which can be achieved by either completing it very fast or carrying at least 100 rings to the end, and I really like the system since it gives yet another reason to explore in addition to giving rings more importance. There is also something called the Perfect bonus, which is acquired by collecting every single ring in a level, which you are rewarded for with 50,000 points. Unfortunately, like half of the game contains rings that are out of bounds, so it's impossible to get it everywhere. Sonic 2's level design is based on Sonic 1's faster stages, with elements of the slower stages reincorporated in a non-obtrusive way. The levels are now designed primarily with speed in mind, which makes them flow better, however it doesn't end up making the game feel mindless or too easy, while elements like water can be avoided if you stay on the top path, and slower tight platforming segments can be skipped if you know the level layout, so they never force you to wait. It does a great job at adapting elements of the first game in order to be more consistent design-wise, and it definitely knows what it wants to be. However, making a proper difficulty curve with levels like these isn't easy, and as the game goes along, we see the developers struggling with this. Whether it be lack of skill or lack of time, during the second half of the game, the level design begins to gradually worsen as levels just don't flow as well and begin to resorting to bad enemy placement as a source of challenge rather than difficult platforming. It's not very noticeable at first, but by the end it becomes a huge issue. Metropolis, the game's last conventional zone and the only one with 3 acts, is literally made out of instances where you can't see an enemy coming, and no matter how many times you replay this level, no matter how many times you know you're about to get hit, you can never prepare yourself for it. Its difficulty feels almost artificially created, like they didn't have enough time to design a proper difficult level, so they threw in a bunch of unfairly placed hazards to simulate one. If you remove all of the enemies from this level, you basically remove all of the difficulty, because beyond its enemy placement, it has literally no substance. After this, the ending section begins, and it's not that bad. Sky Chase is a nice storytelling device, establishing the Tails as a mechanic while also adding some context. However, it lasts a bit too long and it doesn't have enough rings or enemies for you to earn enough points for an extra life or continue, so it feels a bit pointless. Wayne Fortress is actually a pretty decent level, featuring some tight platforming that may seem too difficult on your first try, however, with time becomes a lot easier, which is what Metropolis should have been. You can also skip like half the level by going through this big propeller. Lol. And then there is Death Egg, the game's final level, and it actually has you fight 2 bosses in a row. The first one is Mecha Sonic, which is quite challenging, and I remember struggling a lot with it as a kid, but after some practicing you should be able to beat it. The second and final boss is the Death Egg robot, and it's almost comedic how difficult this boss fight is, up until you learn how to beat it. You see, all you have to do is wait for him to walk for a bit, fly up, stomp, and then you hit him as he's crouching. Do this 12 times and you're done. There is a way to hit him while he's walking, which is very risky, and even with the help of guides, I never managed to pull it off successfully. It's very hard to time and aim your attacks on this guy, and I think the majority of players will struggle with that as well, meaning that the only way most people will be able to beat this boss is with the strategy I mentioned earlier, and I'd argue that this doesn't make for a very engaging boss fight, let alone the final boss. There is no denying that the finale has great presentation and cinematic-like feel that the first game didn't, but design-wise it's not that great. Not as bad as Metropolis, but not stellar. Overall, Sonic 2 is a substantial improvement over the first game. The first half is spectacular, and although the level design takes a big nosedive towards the end, that's where the presentation takes the ball and manages to carry the game all the way to the end. It is a spectacular sequel and a really good game that hasn't aged that badly and is still fun all these years later. Much like with Sonic 1, an 8-bit version of Sonic 2 would soon release, and this one released so soon in fact that it actually came out like a month before the 16-bit version, meaning that technically it is the true first appearance of Tails. It was also not made by the same people who made Sonic 1, but rather Aspect, a studio that will be responsible for almost every single 8-bit Sonic game for the next few years. The plot is that Eggman kidnapped Tails and is bargaining him for the 6 Chaos Emeralds. The game apparently takes place between Sonic 1 and the 16-bit version of Sonic 2, so I guess the 7th Emerald wasn't discovered yet? So you gotta go through the 6 zones and collect 5 Chaos Emeralds hidden in the levels. Then at the end of the 6th zone, you fight Silver Sonic, and if you have all the previous Emeralds, he drops a 6th one, and you move on to the final level where you fight Eggman and rescue Tails. However, if you don't collect all the Emeralds, then the game ends on Silver Sonic, and after the credits, Sonic looks up in the sky and sees Tails, who Eggman presumably disposed of because Sonic failed to comply with his demands. Great, I feel like utter shit now, thanks game. The level design now much closely resembles the 16-bit games, as it's much faster and there are loops in this one. However, the game is missing special stages, the shield power-up, Sonic cannot spin dash, and there are no checkpoints. Like at all. On the other hand though, all of the zones are original with the exception of Green Hill Zone. No, not Green Hill, Green Hills. All of the zones have their own gimmicks like minecarts and hang gliders, which give them their own identity. However, you will never figure out how to use most of them without looking it up. And even then, you'll probably still have a hard time controlling them. The game is hard. And I mean frustratingly hard. And what makes it worse is the screen crunch. As stated before, Game Gear has a very small field of view, and while in Sonic 1 it didn't matter all that much, here it makes all the difference. Since the design is much more focused on speed, there will be many times where you will run into enemies, spikes, or bottomless pits that you couldn't have seen coming. Like seriously, the amount of leaps of faith you have to take is annoying. Overall, it's a fine game, but I prefer Sonic 1's 8-bit counterpart, as it understood the limitations of the hardware it was on and tried to do its own thing, whereas this game attempts to be more like Sonic in its design and as such becomes difficult to play at times. If you're looking for a challenge, I guess you could try it, but for the love of God, play the Master System version, because the Game Gear one is just hell. Alright, next up we have Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop, and it's a popcorn vending machine fused with a minigame. I know it's barely a game, but I thought I might as well add it on the list. You might be wondering why the game is called Sega Sonic. Well, apparently a lot of Japanese Sonic content in the early days was labeled as Sega Sonic because Sega feared getting sued by Taito, who just recently released a game called Sonic Blastman. The dispute was later cleared, but as a result, a few arcade games have Sega Sonic in their title, which is an interesting fact, I guess.
For example, Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter, also known as Waku Waku Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter. Fuck these names, holy shit. Much like Patrol Car, it's another children's ride, except in this one we go to space to fight Eggman. The game itself is a shoot 'em up from a top-down perspective. Not much to say here, let's move on. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. Oh, now this is interesting. It was released in arcades and is done in an isometric style. There are also two new characters, Ray the Flying Squirrel and Mighty the Armadillo. Mighty is actually thought to have been one of the rejected designs for Sonic, and that if Sonic wasn't a hedgehog, he would be an armadillo, and it's a fact I've heard many times throughout the years. However, there is actually barely any evidence supporting this. It's just as likely that Mighty was a scrapped Sonic design and was reused for this game as he wasn't, and was made specifically for the game, so I guess it's probably a myth. The gameplay revolves around you running away from and dodging various obstacles, and since the original game used a trackball for movement, emulating it has become a little tricky. The controls are apparently the reason why the game wasn't re-released or included on any Sonic collections, so if you want to play the game, you'll probably have to play around with the sensitivity. Since it's an arcade game, it's already meant to be difficult, so you gotta make sure you optimize it to your liking as to not make it even more frustrating than it already is. Other than that, the game has really expressive animation and groovy music, and just like all the other arcade games I've mentioned, this one also had voice acting. Apart from Sonic and Eggman's usual voice actors, Ray was voiced by Hinako Yoshino and Mighty was voiced by Yusuke Nomata. There were also apparently plans to localize the game for the West, but unfortunately that never came into fruition. Honestly, it's a really enjoyable game, and I wish Sega re-released it with adapted controls because emulators make this game a little hard to come back to, but I still recommend you give it a try. While Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yasuhara went to America to work on Sonic 2, Naoto Oshima stayed in Japan waiting for his next assignment. Meanwhile, Sega, in preparation for the launch of a CD add-on for the Mega Drive called Mega CD, knew the hardware needed a Sonic game in order to sell well, so they put Oshima in charge of making a spin-off for the add-on and gave him free reign over the project. Since Oshima didn't want his game to be too similar to Sonic 2, he would often call Naka and the rest of the team to ask what they were doing so they both could make sure they were making different games. Oshima also wanted to have new additions to the cast, so Kazuyuki Hoshino, the game's visual designer, came up with two characters, Amy Rose and Metal Sonic. Amy is basically like a fan/simp of Sonic, and she's obsessed with him to the point where she believes they are destined to be together and constantly follows him around in a bit of an obnoxious fashion. Metal Sonic is a robot created by Eggman and modeled after Sonic. He is Eggman's greatest invention and the only one capable of reaching Sonic's speed, which makes him kind of like a rival for Sonic. Sega also made a deal with Toei Animation to create an opening and ending cinematic for the game, and they look fucking incredible. For the longest time, Sonic's design in these cinematics was called Toei Sonic, but as it was recently discovered, the actual animation wasn't done by Toei as they were just the producers, and rather were made by animators at Junio Studio. So, in respect for the animators, the name has been officially changed to Junio Sonic. Well, at least as officially as a fan nickname can get. Dr. Eggman discovers a planet called Little Planet, yes really, changes it to a mountain, yes really, carves his face onto said mountain, yes really, and begins slowly colonizing it while also hunting for the local gems called the Time Stones, which will allow him to control time and space. As Sonic arrives on the planet to stop Eggman, he is followed by Amy, who gets kidnapped by Metal Sonic, and so we have to save her now. The developers wanted to put a twist on the damsel in distress formula by stressing the fact that Sonic is not interested in relationships with women. Especially someone like her. So he's saving Amy for purely moral reasons. Sonic CD is probably the closest we've ever gotten to a creator-driven title, as Oshima had complete creative control over the project, and it becomes evident rather quickly. There are a lot of subtle changes that feel like they were made just to flex. For example, zones are now called rounds, and acts are now called zones, badniks are now powered by flowers as opposed to animals, and Sonic has a new ability called the Super P-Loud, which looks really cool, but is literally just a spin dash without the protection you get from being in a ball state, so it's stupid and useless. Oh, but the spin dash is also here, it's just, different. The biggest change, however, is the game's presentation, which is probably some of the best in the entire series. The visuals are vibrant and psychedelic. The soundtrack, composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata, is chaotic, funky, and catchy as hell. All these things make playing the game for the first time akin to experiencing a fever dream, and this very oddly specific aesthetic the game has is something many fans, including myself, have been longing for, as there really aren't any other products like this. For some reason, Sega of America found the soundtrack to be unsuitable for Western audiences, so they hired musicians Spencer Nilsson and David Young to compose an entirely different soundtrack. It's a lot more tame and ambient than the Japanese one, but it fits the game really well in its own way, so I recommend you check both soundtracks out. The game features a time-traveling mechanic, with each level having a past, present, and 2 future versions which you can travel between by passing through special signposts and then running at top speed for a few seconds uninterrupted. Each version of the level has their own unique graphics and music, and the level terrain is tweaked ever so slightly. There are 3 zones on a round, and the third round always takes place in one of the 2 futures. The gist is that there is the good future and the bad future, and by default you're gonna travel to the bad future. However, if you travel to the past, find and destroy all robot generators scattered across levels, then the future will switch to the good one next time you travel there because you prevented Eggman from taking over. Do that with every zone and you will get the good ending. The special stages are accessed in the same way as in Sonic 1, except here you collect time stones, and the special stages themselves are done in this pseudo 3D style where you run around an area destroying UFOs. I quite like these stages, but it took me a while to get used to the depth perception. I don't think this game has continues, but you do get an extra life for 50,000 points, which you are automatically given for finishing a level under 30 seconds. There is also a sound test where you can enter various codes to find various secret images, like this one, and this one, and this one, and this one.
Oh no.
Where Sonic 2 had an emphasis on speed, Sonic CD takes the opposite approach. It appears to be actively discouraging and even punishing you for going fast. The level structure is very convoluted, seemingly random, and basically ensures that you constantly get interrupted by some kind of an obstacle. Only once you decide to take it slow and explore do the levels become more comprehensible, and it's made very clear that they were designed with exploration in mind. For this reason, the levels are short and very backtrackable, making it easy to search for robot generators and whatnot. However, this doesn't mean that the levels can be beaten quickly. In fact, there is a way to complete almost every single stage under 30 seconds. Yes, even the final one. I mean, they have that score thing for a reason. So, while prioritizing slow and methodical playthrough over speed, the levels still allow for speedrunning, but only once you get to know the layout really well, and looking at it that way, that is a pretty solid interpretation of Sonic's design philosophy that doesn't feel too out of place. However, the problem begins the second you decide not to go after the generators. Because they're completely optional! You don't need the generators to complete the game, and they're not mandatory to get the good ending because collecting the time stones does the same exact thing. And you don't need that either because all you get is a different boss battle background and a "you're too cool" message after the credits. That's it! Same goes for time traveling. You only need to travel to the past to find the generators, and there is literally no reason to ever travel to the future. Like at all, I'm serious. It serves no purpose at all! You can't have a game be designed around certain mechanics and only make sense within the context of you engaging with them if they're completely optional. Do you realize what this means? With this game's level design, your standard playthrough of it will range from frustrating to just boring and unengaging depending on if you have ADHD or not. You'll either be bouncing around hectically due to this game's confusing object placement, or You'll just walk through the entire fucking game without much issue. It's honestly astounding how it manages to have levels that are both packed with objects and yet have literally no substance. The levels have seemingly no thought put into them beyond no fast, yes, walk around easily, and as such they lack any interesting set pieces that either challenge the player or exploit Sonic's physics in any way. I guess time traveling would be an exception technically, but usually the levels always have isolated sections or long stretches of land made specifically for that, so there is not a whole lot of creativity going on. And I honestly find that quite weird considering that Sonic's unique moveset is literally what the franchise was based on. I wouldn't call Sonic CD a horrible game, because at its core, its ideas are not only well executed, but also don't fall too far out of the line from what Sonic is meant to be. And the game's stellar presentation does make for an enjoyable and unique experience. However, there is no denying that the level design has major holes in it that just break the game entirely. And a lot of these issues could have been easily fixed too by, for example, making the generator hunt mandatory. So I'm not going to call Sonic CD fundamentally flawed or say that its design has no rhyme or reason to it, but it does have huge problems that stop me from calling it good. It provides a really solid experience, however requires the player to agree to some optional terms for them to experience that. So if you're down to play the game by its rules, then I will recommend Sonic City. However, if you're there to just have fun, then your opinion will probably depend more on the art style and music than on the actual gameplay. Next up, we have Sonic Chaos, also known as Sonic and Tails in Japan. The game allows you to play as either Sonic or Tails as you go through zones and collect Chaos Emeralds, much like how it was done in 8-bit Sonic 2, except this time, you simply have to collect 100 rings to teleport to the special stage. And also there is no extra level for those who got all the Chaos Emeralds, so once again it's kind of pointless to collect them. Which is a shame, because the special stages are literally the hardest part of the game. The levels are so fucking easy and so fucking short, it's not even funny. You only have to hold right and jump occasionally to beat them, and there are so many rings you'll probably be maxed out on lives and continues very quickly. There are power-ups like rocket shoots that let you skip a portion of the level and a spring that lets you reach higher paths, but because of how short and easy the levels are, they're literally useless. Much like Sonic CD, this game wants you to do a certain thing, in this case collect the emeralds, and has barely to no substance beyond that, but in CD, going through the levels was fun, especially with the game's unique aesthetic. Sure, the levels were packed with nonsensical things, but they were at least packed with something. This game is just empty, it has no soul, and I lost faith in humanity after playing it. Sonic Chaos has so little to it that I can't even formulate my thoughts on it beyond there not being a lot to say. I guess if you find the 16-bit games too challenging, you could give it a try, but other than that, I don't know. However, there is definitely something you can say about Sonic Spinball. As the name suggests, it's a pinball game, however, like the casino level in Sonic 2, it occasionally combines pinball with normal Sonic level design. Basically normal Sonic levels if there were 99% pinball bumpers. It was made by Sega of America and is sort of based on the Set AM cartoons, so it has a slightly darker tone in addition to some characters from the show making an appearance in the level backgrounds. The game has just 4 levels, but you probably won't make it to the second one because of the difficulty. You can spend an hour playing a stage only to die and start over, and Sonic's physics don't make it better. It's not really intuitive to control Sonic mid-air, which is probably a big reason behind the game's difficulty. But that doesn't make it a bad game. It's divisive and a pain to complete, but I wouldn't say it's badly made or designed because clearly a lot of effort was put into it. It's fucking pinball, for fuck's sakes. The fact that they even made it into something that resembles a normal game is already noteworthy. I like the game's concept, and the difficulty gives it more substance, I guess, but I wish they just made it a tiny bit easier so I could at least be able to complete it without cheat codes. If you like weird hardcore games, or you're just very much into pinball, I guess, then I recommend you give this game a try. Sega of America did not stop with Spinball, and next up we got Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, and it's a Puyo Puyo Tetris clone. Literally nothing to say about it. Okay, fine. I guess it's based on the other American Sonic cartoon, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's also the first Sonic game where Sonic doesn't make an appearance. Yeah, okay, I'm done. After Sonic 2's success, it became clear that another sequel would be made, and it didn't take too long to pursue Yuji Naka and the game to get back together to make the next installment in the franchise. However, Naka insisted that only the Japanese STI employees would be involved since he didn't want the development to be consumed by language barrier issues much like Sonic 2's was. And so, while the American branch was working on what would become Sonic Spinball, the Japanese branch began developing the next big gaming sensation. Once again, they wanted to add a new character, so poetically enough,
I'm starting to get sick of this poetry.
They organized yet another Eternal competition, and the winner was Takashi Yuda, with a green, later red, echidna named Knuckles. You get it? Because he
can punch things with his knuckles.
The team wanted to make a game that would really push Mega Drive to its absolute limit, so the project kept getting more and more ambitious until eventually it could not fit on a 16-bit cartridge, so the decision was made to split it into 2. The first half being called Sonic Free and the second Sonic and Knuckles. With the use of the special lock-on technology, you could connect cartridges for both games together, causing them to become one game as the developers originally intended, called Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You could also connect the SNK cartridge to Sonic 2 in order to play as Knuckles in that game. One of the biggest controversies surrounding the game is its soundtrack. Because of the first two games' success, Nakamura became more expensive to hire, so Sega opted to replace him for a bunch of unknown composers. However, around early 2000s, a theory emerged that Michael Jackson himself was actually involved after people began noticing various similarities between music used in the game and some Michael Jackson tracks, in addition to the discovery that almost every single musician credited in-game was involved with Michael at one point or another. But this remained nothing more than an elaborate conspiracy theory until Sega actually admitted to it. Yes, Michael Jackson was at one point involved in making the music for the game, however, due to certain allegations and him not being satisfied with the console's sound chip, he was kicked out and his work was completely erased. Or so they say. As claimed by other composers for the game, and evident by what I said earlier, remnants of Michael Jackson's work can still be found in the final game, and unfortunately the soundtrack's weird legal status is probably the reason why there hasn't been a remaster of Sonic 3 for such a long time. I recommend you watch a video by the D-Pad on the topic. It's really well made, and goes deep into the history of the controversy. Sonic 3 opens with Sonic and Tails discovering a mysterious floating island in the sky named the Angel Island, and on their arrival they meet Knuckles, who punches Sonic out of his super form and takes away the emeralds. Soon, Eggman's presence on the island becomes apparent, and it turns out that the island is able to flow due to the power of a huge gem called the Master Emerald, which Knuckles acts as the guardian of. And the reason Knuckles attacks us is because Eggman convinced him that Sonic is evil and after the Master Emerald, so throughout the game Knuckles will show up trying to inconvenience us in various ways, from sending us to the next zone to committing acts of domestic terrorism. Meanwhile, Eggman has been preparing the launch of the second Death Egg, and our heroes come just in time, disrupting the launch as it happens, which is where the Sonic 3 half of the story ends. The game makes some changes to the structure. Mini-bosses were now added at the end of the first act, the transition between acts is much more seamless, and Sonic has a new power-up called the Insta-Shield. Pressing jump while in air will grant Sonic invincibility for a few frames, as well as enlarging his hitbox. While it sounds like a minor thing, once you master it, the boss fights and enemy encounters become a lot less brutal. This time, there are also 3 different unique shield types. Flame, that lets you dash and makes you immune to fire, Bubble, that lets you bounce and breathe underwater, and Lightning, which lets you double jump while also attracting nearby rings. The special stage entrances are now hidden within the levels themselves, which I think is brilliant, as it gives you the incentive to explore the levels by combining it with the incentive to unlock Super Sonic. The stages consist of you running around Eggman's shaved ballsack, collecting blue spheres and avoiding the red ones. There are also several bonus stages which can be accessed in the same way as special stages were in Sonic 2. There is a rotating casino thing, a gumball machine thing, and whatever the fuck this is. Sonic and Knuckles' story picks up after the failed launch of the Death Egg, and it allows you to play 2 storylines as either Sonic or Knuckles. Sonic's storyline sees him continue to chase Eggman, which leads them to the underground hidden palace where the Master Emerald is kept. There you have a laughably easy boss fight with Knuckles, following which Eggman steals the Emerald and Knuckles, realizing that he was played, helps you get to the Death Egg as it successfully relaunches using the power of the Master Emerald. There you find Eggman's giant robot, and if you have all the Chaos Emeralds collected, you get a bonus final boss fight where you fight Eggman in space and finally stop him for good. Knuckles' storyline takes place after the events of the game and is basically a hardcore mode for Sonic's campaign. Combining the game with Sonic 3 allows you to play as Tails in SNK stages and as Knuckles in Sonic 3 stages, which were actually designed with specific paths only Knuckles can access. You can also collect the Chaos Emeralds twice. First time to become Super Sonic, and second time to become Hyper Sonic, which is insanely overpowered and fun to use. Sonic 3 marks a sort of a return to form for the series. While Sonic 2's levels were primarily designed with speedrunning in mind and consisted mostly of set pieces meant for you to build up and maintain your speed, Sonic 3 decides to reintroduce platforming back into the mix. Much like in Sonic 1, the levels are moderately paced and simply give you the option to either explore them if you're curious enough or speedrun them if you're skilled enough. And while it's great to have these aspects of Sonic 1 brought back and revised, I honestly feel like some of said aspects that Sonic 2 had already improved on were lost as a result. What made Sonic 2 so satisfying to play compared to Sonic 1 was the freedom it gave you. You could approach the game however you wanted and it wouldn't object. You want speed? Here you go. You want exploration? Here you go. You want to do a mix of both and change between them randomly on the go? Here you fucking go. It did a spectacular job at handling the concept of flow and its duality, since playing the game was fun no matter what pace you were feeling like going at the moment. Sonic 3's reincorporation of platforming naturally lowers the focus on terrain, serving as a way to maintain speed, which makes casual speedy playthroughs more difficult and just not as fun as they would be in Sonic 2. Now, I'm not upset at having to do platforming in a platformer, because once you approach the game with the mindset of taking it slow and exploring, it arguably becomes a lot better than Sonic 2, since there's just so much more to keep you invested in that regard. My point is that the core concept of Sonic and what made his games appealing was how you could experience them however you wanted. And looking from that perspective, Sonic 2 just does a better job than Sonic 3. That doesn't mean Sonic 3 is a bad game, no. It has more to offer, is overall more consistent quality-wise, and gives you a much more solid experience to Sonic 2, so I'd even call it a better game. It's just that while it improves on its predecessor in literally almost every single way, it compromises one small crucial aspect that separates Sonic from most other games, which means that neither are really the definitive Sonic game, in my opinion. After the immense success of Mario Kart, Sega decided to give it a shot at making their own racing game, which is how we got Sonic Drift. Released for the Game Gear handheld in Japan only, the game features Sonic, Eggman, Tails, and Amy racing to win Chaos Emeralds. As expected, there isn't really a lot going on, there's not really a plot, so yeah, that's about it. Meanwhile, Sega thought that Sonic and Tails really needed a sequel, and so we got Sonic and Tails 2, known as Sonic Tribble Trouble. As the name suggests, in this game we fight against 3 villains at the same time. Eggman is now joined by Knuckles, who is bad again for some reason, and a new character named Fang the Sniper, a treasure hunter who apparently got his hands on the Chaos Emeralds but isn't aware of their true power. Sonic and Tails team up to stop the blah blah blah, they beat Fang and get the emeralds, blah blah, you know, the usual. The levels are now longer, which means that the power-ups finally have a chance of being useful, and both Sonic and Tails can collect the emeralds now. Apart from that, it's pretty much the same as Chaos. I mean, it's better, but not by much, and doesn't have a lot to offer ultimately, so yeah, kind of a mixed bag. But you know what? Just because the game doesn't have a lot to offer doesn't mean it's bad. As my mom always used to say, the game might not have much substance to it, but it at least can have as little substance to it as Tails and the Music Maker. The game was made for Sega Pico, an educational console for younger children. The goal of the game was to teach young children basic notation in terms like scales and tempo and stuff through mini-games starring Tails, although I'm not sure how effective it was. Oh, that's not enough for you? It's not qualified to be a game, you say? Well, how about Sonic Game World? Another game released for the Sega Pico, which consists of a series of educational mini-games, this time not themed around anything in particular. It's just a collection of random stuff from racing to whack-a-mole and etc.
Oh, that's not good enough for you either? Well, how about Wacky World's creative studio?
To be honest, I'm not sure how to describe this game. It was released as part of the Sega Club line for younger children, and the player has a choice of like 6 different wacky worlds where you can do creative stuff like placing animated stickers, I think. It also has barely anything to do with Sonic, but he does appear in the box art, and in the game you can see him flying a UFO. Wait, what the fuck? Sonic Drift 2. Also called Sonic Drift Racing in America, since the first one was never released there. New characters include Knuckles, Fang, and Metal Sonic, along with a few more stages. That's it.
Jesus, when are we gonna get to an actual game? Oh. Well, this can be good.
In 1994, an early prototype called Sonic Crackers was pitched to Sega. It showed Sonic and Tails tethered together by some rope thing, which the player needed to use to gain speed and navigate through stages. The project was greenlit and brought over to Sega 32X, another add-on allowing you to play 32-bit games on the Mega Drive, and the game was meant to become kinda like the Sonic CD of that hardware. Almost nothing is known about the development of the game, however it went through lots of changes before coming out in 1995 under the name Knuckles Chaotix. The story differs between regions, but the gist is that Dr. Eggman and Metal Sonic discover an island that is home to the 6 powerful artifacts called the Chaos Rings, and Knuckles teams up with a brand new cast of characters to stop them. The team is collectively called the Chaotix and features Vector the Crocodile, Charmy the Bee, Espio the Chameleon, and Mighty the Armadillo. Yes, the same Mighty from Sega Sonic. This will actually be his last appearance in games until relatively recently, as the Chaotix will appear in future games without him. Now, the elephant in the room has to be the ring tether mechanic, as the entire game revolves around it. You get to control two characters who are tied together, and you have to get through the levels by taking advantage of the ring tether to perform various stunts and achieve never-before-seen levels of speed in order to progress, and the levels have been adjusted accordingly as they're now much larger and more vertical compared to your standard Sonic levels. There are 6 zones, 5 acts each, and both the act you're gonna be playing and the character you will be playing with will be determined randomly by a roulette every time. Each character has his own unique ability. Knuckles can glide and climb walls, much like he could in Sonic 3, Vector can do an adirectional air dash, Espio just climbs walls, and Charmy flies indefinitely. They also have the spin dash, however it was nerfed significantly to encourage the use of the ring tether. There are also these grow and shrink monitors that make you, well, grow or shrink. They're completely useless, and in the case of shrink, actually harmful, since your jump height is reduced, making you incapable of advancing through the level for about 20 seconds. The special stages are accessed much like in Sonic 1, and there is sort of like a mix of stages between 2 and 3. That is, you run for this polygonal landscape collecting blue spheres. It might actually be my favorite special stage type, as it's not as luck or trial and error based, as it introduces new elements that it later remixes in interesting ways, which is fun.
Unlike the actual game.
Now, I don't think the ring tether mechanic is inherently flawed. It certainly has some potential, so my problem isn't that the game doesn't feel like Sonic, although I'd obviously prefer that. My problem is that the game is just fundamentally broken. Most of the time, you'll have no control over the character as you'll be tossed around the level like a ragdoll. Trying to play this game is an incredibly stressful experience, especially when it's made pointless by Charmy, who can literally be used to fucking fly past the entire game. I like the roulette idea because in theory it is supposed to keep the game from becoming boring. However, since none of the levels have any pits, spikes, or competent enemies for that matter, they all feel exactly the same. And as for the characters, it doesn't matter who your partner is, because they're all equally useless when you're left to the mercy of the ring tether. And, as if that wasn't enough, aside from the cast, there are also 2 joke characters, Heavy and Bomb, added specifically so that the player could have the option to suffer. No, seriously, playing the game, period, is painful, but playing it with these guys, oh, it becomes a fucking Soviet comedy of some style. Heavy is, well, heavy, so it's not as easy to climb up with him, and Bomb literally explodes anytime he collides with something. Who thought any of this was a good idea?
Pretty much the only good things about this game are the visuals, the music, and the special stages, because everything else, you know, everything that has to do with the gameplay of the game, is just broken beyond repair.
I do want to give them credit though. Here at least the bad ending is memorable, as you get to watch a giant monster metal Sonic destroy a city with burning flames of hell, which accurately describes my playthrough process. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for the developers. They probably quickly realized how broken the concept was, but since the project was already greenlit, they just went along with it, trying their best to make something playable, because it's clear that they put a lot of work into making this thing work, and although they failed miserably, at least they put passion into it, which I commend. Don't get me wrong though, the game is still pretty bad, and I don't recommend you play it, unless you're a game designer trying to salvage old broken ideas. Released for the Game Gear in Japan only, Tails Sky Patrol sees the player assume the role of Tails, who tries to save an island from the evil witch card. It's a witch in a card. It's a witch in a card. It's a witch in a card. And during the game, Tails is permanently in a flying state as the player moves around and uses a ring Tails carries to grab nearby objects and kill enemies. Despite being designed for younger kids and having only 5 zones, including the tutorial, the game is insanely difficult, mostly due to its horrible hit detection and controls. If Tails is as much as bumps into anything, he instantly dies. Almost every single inch of the level is deadly.
So yeah, Tails' first game, not a big success. However, we did get Tails Adventure.
It's another solo Tails game made for the Game Gear, however this one actually has substance to it. Tails is taking a break on Cocoa Island when suddenly An army of birds on mechs invade in hopes of finding the Chaos Emeralds, so Tails travels around the island and exterminates the entire race of birds.
Jesus fucking Christ, he's only 8 and he's already committing war crimes? I'm so proud of him. They grow up so fast.
The game is much slower than your average Sonic and more closely resembles a Metroidvania as you walk around and explore, finding items that will help you progress. Tails can also throw bombs to kill enemies, as well as send out a small remote-controlled robot that can fit into tight holes. Additionally, there are also underwater segments where Tails controls a submarine. Overall, it's a small but decent game that tries to do its own thing and does a fine job at it. I actually quite enjoyed my time with this one. However, the same can't be said for Sonic Labyrinth. Yet another Game Gear game and oh god. Eggman sneaks into Sonic's house and replaces his shoes with bootleg ones so Sonic can't go fast anymore. This is so stupid. The game is done in an isometric style as you explore mazes and look for free keys, and because of Sonic's shoes he can run properly or jump, so his main means of transportation is this nerfed spin dash, which makes the game look like miniature golf. The game is extremely short and easy, but Sonic is incredibly hard to control when he's spin dashing, and since you're doing this for most of the game, yeah, it's not a very pleasant experience.
It's infamous in the fandom for being among the worst Sonic games, and I really don't know what to think of it. I mean, it sucks. Like a lot. But it also barely qualifies to be called a game because of how little there is to it, so it's just...
Next up is Sonic the Fighters, an arcade fighting game that is also the first ever game in the series to be done in full 3D, and is also the reason why Sonic was in the Wreck-It Ralph movie. Eggman builds another large thing in space we need to blow up, so Tails builds a rocket, but forgets to account for the number of passengers. And moreover, in order for the rocket to launch, it needs the power of the 8 Chaos Emeralds. So a fighting tournament is organized to determine who will go to space to stop Eggman. There are 8 playable characters: Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Espio, Fang, as well as 2 new characters, Spark the Bowler Bear and Bean the Dynamite.
You can forget they exist.
Originally, there was meant to be another playable character, Honey the Cat, who is basically a fursona of a character of the same name from another fighting game that was made on the same engine. She ended up being cut from the game for some reason, however was added back as a hidden character in the 2012 re-release. The final encounter is against Eggman himself, as well as Metal Sonic, who is also an unlockable character in this game alongside Super Sonic. I'm not really good at fighting, so I don't know what to say about this, except, I mashed the action button and that seemed to work, so yay. And finally, we get to the last Sonic game on the Game Gear handheld, Sonic Blast. Sonic and Knuckles team up to stop Eggman and dear god, what the oh god, it looks so Yeah, this game uses pre-rendered graphics, which is why it looks like that. I mean, it certainly is impressive for a handheld console, but ew! Apart from the visuals, there isn't anything noteworthy to say about it except that the number of Chaos Emeralds has decreased to 5.
Sonic Schoolhouse. The first educational title to play like a game. I got a good feeling about this one.
I'm Sonic. Click on me for help.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be good.
Click on the character you want to be, then hit the green traffic light.
What if I don't want to be any of these people? I mean, if I was a little kid who got this as a gift, I'd much rather prefer playing as Sonic and not crackhead bull or sexual predator crocodile. Seriously, why do they all look so sus? Okay, fine. You know what they say, reject humanity, return to monkeys. So let's try this out. Okay, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing, fuck.
This was the first and only Sonic game to be a PC exclusive, and it's an educational first-person game where you walk around a school and solve puzzles, and I just gotta say, this game is just nightmare fuel. I'm sorry. Apart from making you feel like you're high or making you regret being alive, it's just a boring educational PC game from the 90s that also happens to have Sonic. Maybe. I'm still not sure if that's Sonic. Maybe he's an imposter. Disappointed with the sales of their consoles, Sega outsourced the development of a new Sonic game for the Mega Drive to Traveler's Tales, who initially turned the offer down because they wanted to focus on making games for the current generation. However, when they found out that the said game was going to be the newest installment in the Sonic franchise, they finally agreed. People like Yasuhara were brought on from Sonic Team to help with things like level design, including a certain Takashi Iizuka, who by the end of this retrospective you will probably start to resent. And thus we got Sonic 3D Blast. Dr. Eggman infiltrates an island inhabited by birds called Flickies because he thinks that they're connected to the Chaos Emeralds, so Sonic and co try to stop him. The game is apparently a sequel to the 1984 arcade game called Flicky, which, sure? It's done in an isometric style with pre-rendered graphics a la Donkey Kong Country, and each level is divided into several sections where you have to collect 5 Flickies from enemies and slam dunk them into a giant ring to proceed to the next section. In-game, you can also find either Tails or Knuckles, and depositing them 50 rings will transport you to the special stages, which are a nerd version of the Sonic 2 stages where you run on a bridge collecting rings and avoiding bombs, and they're pathetically easy. It really is impressive how Titty managed to pull off such graphics on a 16-bit console. However, the game's isometric style brings a major problem. Depth perception. Trying to hit enemies or land on a platform is incredibly frustrating in the pseudo 3D environment, and it's only exacerbated by the controls because Jesus fucking Christ, Sonic moves around like the ground is covered in oil. If you run uninterrupted for longer than a second, you'll gain so much speed that you won't be able to stop unless you hit an enemy or a wall. This makes precise platforming almost impossible, as it is incredibly difficult to aim your jumps properly, and luckily the game understands this because apart from flat terrain and later on occasional basic platforming, it doesn't require you to do anything difficult. However, where the game really begins to fall apart is the whole bird mechanic thing. You see, if you get hit by something, the birds you collected immediately scatter and you have to catch them all again, and since you're basically guaranteed to hit something almost all the time, you can imagine how frustrating this is, right? And as if that wasn't enough, individual birds can also get hit by random projectiles, in which case they will quietly fly away only for you to notice at the very end of the section. This really stretches out the game, as completing these stages will take you 10 to 15 minutes, when on their own they probably last around a minute. But on the other hand, without the bird mechanic, you'd probably be left with a shell of a game since the level design isn't very engaging, as I said. And overall, you kinda get used to it. I can't guarantee that you'll enjoy this game, however personally, as frustrating as it was, I kinda did. It's a really bizarre game, both in the context of the series and the video game industry as a whole, and I'd call it a fun little experiment. Titty really made something special. Titty. While other studios were making spin-offs, STI was tasked with making the next big thing, and although several pitches were accepted, one would ultimately take the lead. Codenamed Sonic Mars, it was meant to take the series into the third dimension. The project was originally developed for the 32X before being cancelled and then brought back for Sega's newest console, Sega Saturn, under the new name Sonic X-treme. Over the course of the development, the team had to start over multiple times, and the people in charge of the whole thing kept constantly changing, meaning that nobody knew what was going on and what they were meant to do. Not only that, but due to the tight deadlines, several staff members had reportedly been hospitalized and were on the verge of death due to stress and overworking. Sonic X-treme was eventually cancelled in 1996, and in its place, a Saturn port of 3D Blast was released. The game would remain a mystery for the fans until the footage of the prototypes along with a bunch of assets were leaked in late 2000s. The extent of the impact the game would have had on the series and Sega in general had it been released is unclear, but most people seem to agree that it's probably a good thing it got cancelled, as Saturn's hardware wasn't the best fit for fully fledged 3D games, and the final product would have probably damaged the series' reputation even more by looking pathetic in comparison to the likes of Mario 64. That said, the story of Sonic X-treme and its development process is very fascinating, and despite the fact that the game never was, the hard work the developers put into it will never be forgotten and would later be used as a basis for future Sonic titles. Having finished their work on 3D Blast, Titty, stop that virgin, stop! I began making prototypes for a Formula 1 racing game for the Saturn. However, the tragic fate of Sonic X-treme led Sega to cancelling the project and tasking the team with repurposing the game to be a Sonic racing game so they had something to release for the holiday season of that year. And the result was Sonic R. The game lets you play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy with a few unlockable characters like Eggman and Metal Sonic. There are 4 tracks which the characters race on, and the first thing you notice immediately is that unlike the past racing games in this series, the characters all run by foot, except Amy and Eggman who use vehicles. Beating the 4 tracks along the final track, and it's Rainbow Road. It's literally fucking Rainbow Road. God damn! Once you beat this track, the credits roll and you unlock Eggman. However, to unlock the rest of the characters, you need to collect 5 tokens in each track and then beat a one-on-one race against that character. In addition, there are also Chaos Emeralds scattered across the tracks, and if you collect them all, Sonic will turn super and become so overpowered the game stops being fun. There are also a few power-ups you can find like boost or extra rings, which in this game you need to collect to use as fuel for the speed boosters located on each track. The more rings you have, the further they boost you, and they're really useful especially against the one-on-one races. The biggest problem this game has is the controls. They're not sensitive enough, which makes turning a chore, and you'll find yourself constantly bumping into walls and falling off the course. The game is also very short. Beating the main stages will probably take you around 20 minutes, and although the additional content is pretty cool and it does take some skill to collect all the emeralds and unlock all the characters, there isn't enough content to give you the incentive to do that, honestly. It's not an outright bad game. Clearly effort was made, but it just doesn't have enough for me to call it good either. The soundtrack is great though. It doesn't fit the game at all, and in the context of it, it's horrible and cringy, but it's the kind of thing you like ironically before eventually getting into it for real. There is also a popular creepypasta associated with one of the unlockable characters, Tails Doll. According to an urban internet legend, if you 100% the game and then tag Sonic while playing as Tails Doll, then Tails Doll will kill Sonic before jumping out on the screen and killing you. Ooh, spooky.
And thus concludes part 1 of my Sonic retrospective. I hope you enjoyed this video despite it being absurdly long, but do not worry because it's only going to get longer from here. For in the next part, we're going to be taking a look at perhaps the most fascinating era of this franchise, and that is its jump to 3D. I'm Flor Geneva, and thank you for watching.